New York City in the late 1970s was a place of contradictions. On one hand, it was the beating heart of American culture, home to Wall Street, Broadway, and the glittering lights of Manhattan. On the other hand, it was a city drowning in crime. Streets were littered with graffiti, violent crime was rampant, and the influence of organized crime families could be felt in nearly every corner of the city. In this turbulent atmosphere, a crime took place that would go down as one of the most legendary heists in American history. The Lufthansa Heist at JFK Airport. The mafia's grip on New York was at its peak. 5 powerful families controlled unions, construction, gambling, and even parts of the city's political system. Beneath the glamour of the mob lifestyle was a ruthless underworld where loyalty was demanded but rarely guaranteed. Among the many mobsters rising through the ranks was James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke, an associate of the Lucchese crime family. Known for his intelligence, charm, and sheer ruthlessness, Burke had built a reputation as someone who could plan and execute robberies with military precision. Burke wasn't a made man in the mafia. He wasn't Italian, and the rules were strict. But his criminal talent made him invaluable. By the mid-1970s, Burke was running crews that specialized in hijackings and robberies at JFK Airport. Air cargo theft was practically a cottage industry in New York at the time. Trucks were hijacked, containers stolen, and bribed airport workers helped ensure the mob got its cut. But in 1978, Burke got wind of something far bigger than any routine hijacking. The tip came from an insider. Lufthansa, the German airline, was flying in millions of dollars in cash every week from its overseas operations. Because of international currency restrictions, American banks needed US dollars in cash, and Lufthansa regularly shipped it into New York. Once it arrived, the money was stored temporarily in the Lufthansa cargo terminal at JFK Airport before being transported to banks. Security was minimal. For an ambitious mobster like Burke, this was the golden ticket. The inside man was Louis Werner, a Lufthansa cargo supervisor drowning in gambling debts. Desperate to pay off what he owed, Werner spilled the details. Where the cash was kept, when it arrived, how many guards were on duty, and how thin the security really was. For Burke, the opportunity was irresistible. A quick, surgical strike could net millions, more than any of his previous robberies combined. Burke assembled a crew of trusted associates, most of them connected to the Lucchese family. Each had a role. Tommy DeSimone, a hot-headed but fearless enforcer, Angelo Sepe, a reliable driver, and several others whose names would later echo in FBI files and mafia lore. They carefully planned the operation for weeks. The rules were clear: move fast, don't fire a shot unless absolutely necessary, and above all, no one could talk afterward. The night of December 10, 1978, was freezing. Snow covered the ground at JFK Airport, the air heavy with fog. In the early hours of December 11th, as the city slept, Burke's crew gathered near the airport. Dressed in ski masks and gloves, carrying pistols and walkie-talkies, they moved toward the Lufthansa cargo terminal in a stolen van. At approximately 3 a.m., the heist began. The men stormed the building with military-like coordination. The night security guard was caught off guard and quickly subdued. Within minutes, several other employees were rounded up, tied with duct tape, and blindfolded. Not a single shot was fired. For the workers, the masked men seemed to appear out of nowhere, moving with speed and confidence. Inside the terminal, the robbers forced a supervisor to deactivate alarms and open the secured vault area. The tension was electric. The workers knew they were dealing with professionals. When the vault doors finally swung open, the crew stared at what looked like an endless stream of boxes and bags filled with cash. Bundles of US dollars stacked neatly, alongside jewels worth hundreds of thousands. The men quickly loaded everything into their waiting van. In less than 90 minutes, it was over. By 4:30 a.m., the robbers had vanished into the fog, leaving behind terrified employees and an empty vault. The final tally shocked the world: $5 million in cash and nearly $1 million in jewelry, the equivalent of more than $25 million today. At the time, it was the largest cash robbery in American history. News of the heist broke within hours. Headlines called it the crime of the century. The FBI immediately descended on JFK Airport, interviewing workers, scouring for fingerprints, and setting up surveillance. But Burke's crew had been careful. They left no obvious evidence, no cameras had captured their faces, and none of the employees could identify them. For Jimmy Burke and his crew, the heist should have been a victory. They had pulled off the impossible, a multi-million-dollar robbery without a single casualty. In the underworld, their success was whispered with awe. But even as they celebrated, a storm was brewing. Burke knew from experience that money was both a blessing and a curse. A haul this big would draw attention, not just from the FBI, but from rival gangsters. And worse, Burke began to worry about his own men. He knew the mafia's golden rule: the fewer people involved, the better. A secret this big could not be trusted to so many. One flashy purchase, one careless word, one weak link could bring the entire operation down. The days after the robbery, Burke ordered his crew to lay low. No new cars, no jewelry, no big spending. But greed is a powerful force. Within weeks, members of the crew began flaunting their newfound wealth. Expensive cars, fur coats, and luxury goods suddenly appeared in their lives. To Burke, it was a death sentence. He believed anyone careless enough to attract attention was a liability. The Lufthansa Heist had been the perfect crime, but its aftermath would prove bloodier than the robbery itself. As the FBI closed in and Burke's paranoia grew, the once celebrated crew would begin to fall, one by one. The morning after the Lufthansa Heist, New York was buzzing with shock and fascination. Newspapers screamed the headlines, $6 million robbery at JFK Airport. It was instantly branded the crime of the century. For the general public, it was a story of daring thieves outsmarting the system. For the FBI, it was a nightmare, a brazen theft on American soil, with the suspects vanishing without a trace. Federal agents swarmed JFK Airport, interviewing every employee. They quickly learned from terrified workers how a group of masked men had stormed the Lufthansa terminal, tied them up, and disappeared into the fog. But beyond that, there were no leads. No cameras had caught the robbers, no obvious fingerprints were left behind, and the crew had been disciplined enough not to reveal their identities. Behind the headlines, however, the reality was far more dangerous. Inside the mafia world, the heist sparked both celebration and paranoia. Jimmy Burke, the suspected mastermind, knew he had achieved something historic. But he also knew the danger wasn't over. The sheer size of the haul meant that too many eyes, both from law enforcement and rival mob families, would now be watching. And with too many people involved, Burke's biggest fear began to eat at him: someone talking. Burke's rule was simple: no unnecessary risks. He had warned his men not to make flashy purchases, to blend in, to keep their mouths shut. But greed and arrogance quickly unraveled the discipline of the crew. Within days, one of the robbers bought his wife an expensive fur coat. Another showed up at a party driving a brand-new luxury car. To Jimmy Burke, this was betrayal. These men weren't just putting themselves at risk, they were putting him at risk. Soon, Burke began cleaning house. One by one, members of the Lufthansa crew started disappearing. Some were last seen leaving bars late at night, only to be found dead in abandoned cars. Others vanished completely, their bodies never recovered. To outsiders, it seemed like the mafia was erasing its own fingerprints from the crime. For the FBI, the sudden wave of murders confirmed what they already suspected: the Lufthansa heist was connected to the mafia. Surveillance teams tailed suspected Lucchese associates, including Burke, but gathering hard evidence was nearly impossible. Mafia loyalty, the code of silence, or omerta, meant nobody was willing to testify. Even those who feared for their lives kept their mouths shut. The paranoia extended beyond Burke's immediate crew. Higher-ups in the Lucchese family grew nervous too. Millions of dollars in untraceable cash had been stolen, but very little seemed to be flowing upward to the bosses. Rumors spread that Burke was holding back more than his fair share. In the mafia, greed was as dangerous as betrayal. Meanwhile, the FBI was relentless. They wiretapped phones, planted bugs, and flipped informants whenever possible. But each time they got close, witnesses vanished or turned up dead. The Lufthansa investigation dragged on for years, with little progress. For the public, the story of the daring robbery faded from the headlines, but for law enforcement, it remained an obsession. One of the most significant breakthroughs came years later, not directly from a heist itself, but from a man who had once been part of Burke's inner circle: Henry Hill. Hill was a career criminal, deeply tied to Burke and the Lucchese family. But after being arrested on drug trafficking charges in the early 1980s, Hill faced a choice: go to prison for decades, or cooperate with the government. Choosing survival, Hill entered the witness protection program and began spilling secrets. Hill's testimony pulled back the curtain on mafia life. He confirmed what the FBI had long suspected, that Jimmy Burke had orchestrated the Lufthansa heist. He described the planning, the crew, and most importantly, the violent aftermath. Hill's revelations became the foundation for books, documentaries, and eventually Martin Scorsese's iconic film Goodfellas. Through Hill's eyes, the world learned just how dangerous life inside Burke's orbit really was. Despite Hill's cooperation, Jimmy Burke himself was never convicted for the Lufthansa robbery. Prosecutors simply didn't have enough concrete evidence to tie him directly to the crime. Instead, Burke was taken down for other charges, including point-shaving schemes in college basketball and later, murder. He was sentenced to prison in the 1980s, where he remained until his death in 1996. The fate of the Lufthansa millions remains one of organized crime's greatest mysteries. Very little of the stolen cash was ever recovered. Some believe it was laundered through businesses and gambling operations. Others think much of it was kept hidden, lost forever as Burke's crew was systematically wiped out. Whatever the truth, the missing millions added an extra layer of myth to the already legendary heist. The Lufthansa heist stands as more than just a story of a robbery. It symbolizes an era when the mafia's power was at its peak, when entire institutions could be shaken by a single criminal operation. It also serves as a cautionary tale about greed, loyalty, and betrayal. The robbery itself was pulled off with surgical precision, but it was undone by human weakness. More than 4 decades later, the Lufthansa heist continues to fascinate true crime enthusiasts, historians, and the public alike. It was a crime that changed the way airports handled security, forced law enforcement to rethink how it investigated organized crime, and inspired countless retellings in popular culture. In the end, the heist that promised riches instead brought ruin. The men who dared to steal millions found themselves hunted, not just by the FBI, but by their own associates. And as history shows, in the mafia world, the only real winners are silence and survival. The Lufthansa heist remains unsolved in the sense that no one was ever truly punished for it, and the money was never found. But its legacy endures, as both one of the greatest robberies in American history and one of the bloodiest betrayals in the history of organized crime.